This might turn out to be one of my personal favorite videos that I've made so far, since it involves my favorite subjects in history, such as aviation and military history. Hey guys, Mustang here. Today we're going to be breaking down a Twitch clip from one of Captain Slicerax's War Thunder streams. In the Twitch clip, Slicerax is flying a Spitfire F Mark 22, also known as the Griffin Spitfire, and one of his opponents is flying an F-3D Sky Knight jet fighter. For those of you who don't know who Captain Slicerax is, he is a Twitch VTuber and history content creator here on YouTube, where he talks about military jet aircraft. However, he is currently branching out, doing tanks and prop planes such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and the M1 Abrams main battle tank. Now, before I show you guys the Twitch clip, I'm going to go over both aircraft and compare them to see what advantages and disadvantages they have over another. Then we will look at the clip and break it down to see how Captain Slicerax managed to come out on top over a jet fighter. Let's get started. The Spitfire F Mark 22 was one of the last models that was in mass production during World War II, and would be one of the last that would actually see any combat. The Supermarine Spitfire began its life in the mid to late 1930s, just before World War II, during a major push by countries around the world to adopt new all-metal construction monoplane aircraft and ditch the older fabric wooden-framed biplane aircraft of the 1910s and 1920s. Now, unlike most Spitfire models and variants, the Spitfire F Mark 22 was wedded to the Rolls-Royce Griffin engine instead of the more iconic Merlin engine, which gave it the nickname the Spitfire Griffin or the Griffin Spitfire. It also differed in its armament, having 4 wing-mounted Hispano Mark II 20mm cannons, instead of the mixture of 20mm cannons and 30 and 50 caliber machine guns like other models had throughout the war. The British Royal Air Force had initially ordered about 600 Spitfire F Mark 22s for their squadrons. However, when World War II came to an end in 1945, the order was cut down to about 260 aircraft, and by the mid-1950s, the Spitfire F Mark 22, along with all other Spitfire models and variants, were phased out completely from the RAF in favor of new, more powerful, faster fighter jets. Speaking of jet fighters, let's move on to the F-3D Sky Knight. The F-3D Sky Knight was the U.S. Navy's very first jet fighter, as well as their very first carrier-based night fighter meant to fly and fight exclusively at night. Unlike other fighter aircraft at the time, night fighters were meant to fly and fight exclusively in the dark of night. And the way they would do this is that pilots would use their altimeter and compass to navigate, while using their radar to detect other enemy aircraft in the dark. As the F-3D Sky Knight first took flight in 1948 and would begin entering service with the U.S. Marines and Navy in 1951 during the height of the Korean War, it wasn't exactly the most powerful fighter jet the U.S. had in service at that time. Since it was designed in the mid-1940s, it was a straight-winged jet design, unlike its counterparts in the U.S. Air Force, which had swept wings. However, that didn't mean that the plane wasn't a slouch in air-to-air combat. It was still very fast and very maneuverable, more maneuverable than the MiG-15 that it would start seeing action against during the war, and was equipped with the latest and greatest in radar technology, the APQ-65. Now, in terms of its engines and armament, the F-3D Sky Knight was wedded to a pair of J34WE turbojet engines, both of which would produce an upwards of 3,000 pounds of thrust each. Therefore, it would produce a total of 6,000 pounds of thrust. and it was armed with 4 M3 20mm cannons with about 800 rounds, allowing it to dish out a great deal of damage against other enemy jet fighters, such as the MiG-15. Since the F-3D Sky-Knight was a night fighter, it didn't see as much action as other jet fighters during the Korean War, but that didn't mean it didn't score any air-to-air kills. It actually scored a total of 6 air-to-air kills against enemy fighters, 4 of which were the Soviet-built MiG-15s. However, after the Korean War had ended, the F-3D Sky-Knight's role as a night fighter would be limited down to a testbed aircraft, used to test out new radar technologies and even new air-to-air weapons, such as air-to-air missiles that would be used throughout the Vietnam War and would even still be in use today, such as the AIM-7 Sparrows, AIM-9 Sidewinders, and even the AIM-4 Falcons. By the time the 1970s came around, the F-3D was finally retired and phased out completely from the U.S. Armed Forces, not only because it was an extremely old and obsolete aircraft, but by this time, all aircraft of all types were being fitted with radar and were also being able to fly and fight at night, therefore rendering the dedicated night fighter completely worthless. With the overviews of both aircraft now out of the way, we can start comparing them to see what advantages they have over each other. Now, both the Spitfire and the Sky-Knight are armed with 4 20mm cannons, giving them an excellent degree of firepower, though it does come at a cost of ammo capacity. They also have excellent dive rates, especially since the Spitfire Griffin has a quintuple or 5-bladed propeller that helps it scoop more air. However, being a jet-powered carrier-based night fighter, the F-3D Sky-Knight has advanced on-board radar, at least advanced at the time, better durability than the Spitfire, and has a 60-mile-per-hour speed advantage, which also translates into its excellent climb rate. Despite these advantages that the F-3D Sky-Knight has, the Spitfire Griffin has some of its own advantages, such as a higher service ceiling and a better maneuverable turn rate, which also makes it far more agile than the heavier Sky-Knight. However, no matter the advantages or disadvantages both planes have over each other, it always comes down to the pilots who fly them. With the comparisons of both the F-3D Sky-Knight and the Spitfire Griffin out of the way, we can now look at Captain Slicerax's clip and start breaking it down to see how he managed to come out on top over the Sky-Knight.
Okay, me and a Sky-Knight just went into a merge, and neither of us hit each other. Is he actually trying to turn with me?
Also, thank you, Lord Inquisitor, for the follow.
Yes!
Get him?
Give me the jet kill! Yes! Sorry.
Get him fast! Yeah!
Sweet.
Alright, so now with the clip out of the way, let's start breaking down what happened. At the beginning of the clip, we see Captain Slicerax and the F-3D Sky-Knight get into a head-on merge while shooting each other. However, neither one manages to score a single hit. As both Captain Slicerax and the F-3D Sky-Knight pass each other, Slicerax makes a 180-degree diving turn to his right in order to come back around on the Sky-Knight. However, as he does so, he notices the Sky-Knight trying to turn with him initially, before going into a straight-up power dive to the ground to perform a strafing run on one of Slicerax's team's bases. This opens the F-3D up for an attack by Slicerax, who begins his own power dive to the ground and even turns it into the Sky-Knight as he pulls out of his attack run. As he does so, Slicerax fires his 4 20mm cannons into the jet fighter, hitting it severely and even causing it to catch fire. Slicerax then fires another quick burst into the F-3D Sky-Knight, causing one of its wings to come apart and start plummeting to the ground in a flat spin, and moments later he would crash into the ground, giving Slicerax the confirmation of a kill. Alright, I'm going to ask you guys a quick question. What did the F-30 Sky do wrong here? What did he do wrong that got him shot down? What mistake or mistakes did he make that Slicerax capitalized on? I'm going to be explaining in some detail of what he did wrong and what he could have done to get the advantage over Slicerax and possibly take him down. Obviously, the first mistake the F-30 Sky Knight made was that he tried to turn with Slicerax, at least at first. But his second mistake was switching targets from a moving target like Slicerax, which was a current threat to him, to a more vulnerable stationary target in the form of one of Slicerax's bases. This is what pretty much got him shot down in the first place, and likely destroyed whatever controller, keyboard or mouse, or even monitor that he was using, because War Thunder can really make people rage, and I should know. Now, what the F-30 Sky Knight could have done was, after the merge, he could have zoom climbed above Slicerax as he was making his 180-degree turn, and at the top of his climb, he could have done a screaming power dive back down to Slicerax, catching him off guard and shooting him down. But instead, the Sky Knight tried to turn with a much more agile plane, which cost him the dogfight, and likely the match as well. Now, yes, so you could say that this would never happen because this happened in War Thunder, and War Thunder is a video game. But that doesn't mean that encounters like this between prop planes and jet fighters did not happen after World War II and during the Korean War and even the Vietnam War. In fact, they actually did. Aircraft that were prop planes did go up against heavier, faster jet fighters during both proxy conflicts. In 1952, Jesse Fulmar, a U.S. Navy fighter pilot flying an F-4U Corsair alongside his wingman, were jumped by a group of MiG-15 fighters. During the engagement, Fulmar managed to shoot down one of the MiG-15s with his Corsair's 20mm cannons. However, he too would be shot down, but would survive the engagement and return back to Navy service. And in 1965, a flight of 4 A-1 Skyraider fighter bombers were jumped by a pair of MiG-17s, where during the engagement, two of the Skyraiders shot down one of the MiG-17s with their 4 M3 20mm cannons, not only surviving the engagement, but scoring their first air-to-air gun kill of the Vietnam War for the United States Armed Forces, and the only air-to-air gun kill for the USS Midway, the aircraft carrier that the Skyraiders were a part of. In fact, the documentary series known as Dogfight actually has an episode that talks about this engagement. Here's the clip right now.
High explosive rounds punish the MiG. The Skyraiders have done the impossible.
All in all, while prop fighters by the early jet era were very much becoming obsolete compared to the newer, faster jet fighters that were replacing them, they were to never ever be underestimated by the jet fighter pilots who were flying them, as they would have their asses kicked full size. And also, never take on Captain Slicerax in a War Thunder match and expect to come out on top because he's flying a slower airplane or an older tank, because he will still find a way to kick your ass. And that is it for today's video. This has honestly been an extremely fun video for me to do because it involves my favorite subjects in history, such as military aviation history, Cold War history, World War II history, and military aviation history. And I would also like to thank Captain Slicerax for allowing me to use his Twitch clip from Twitter for this video. And with that, the video is now pretty much over. But before I say like, comment, subscribe, and all that stuff, I want to inform you guys about something else I've been doing for a while now. You see, I am a fanfiction writer over on Wattpad. I already have several fanfictions on my Wattpad that I have either completely published in their entirety and publishing right now, or am currently waiting to publish again in the near future. And it would be really awesome if you guys went over there, read some of my stuff, commented about my writing and more, and even give me a follow on there, because I also plan on doing my own original book at some point in the future as well. But with all that out of the way, if you guys don't want to, you can like, dislike, comment, and subscribe, as well as turn on notifications to see what other content I might upload in the future. Bye guys.